Welcome to Group Talk, a monthly podcast conversation from the Small Group Network, focusing on topics relevant to small groups ministries. Whether you're in a church of 100 or 10,000, whether you are a volunteer or staff, we want to support, encourage, and equip you to lead well. So relax and listen to today's program.
Hi, welcome to Group Talk. My name is Caroline Takeda, your host, and this is part 2 of my conversation with Amy Jackson. If you missed part 1, I encourage you to go back and listen to that 30-minute program because that will give you a context for the rest of this conversation. So let's continue to talk about team retreats. So, Amy, now that in part 1, we've talked about setting a clear goal for the retreat, all the logistics, the location, the invitation to who should be there, and all some of those ideas. Now let's talk about the nuts and bolts. What are the activities? How can we fill up this time in a way that people are going to feel refreshed and invested in and feel valued? What are some things we can do?
Yeah, that's great. I think we have to really think about some of those things we talked about in part 1, being really intentional about the relational things, the things that can only be done in this setting, in this place. But that still leaves a lot of things.
Right.
So I have 3 things that I love to suggest to people, no matter how long your retreat is, if it's a morning or a whole day or a weekend, that I think can be really, really helpful and can be scaled to your time. So the first thing is and this sounds so simple, but some type of breathing or centering exercise as you begin your time together. So here's what I mean by that. We have to acknowledge that as we come together for a retreat time, that everyone's coming in with stuff, right? Like we've got the whole to-do list. Right. It may have been a crazy morning with the kids. Right. Who knows? We've just got a lot of things happening. And so, time and time again, it doesn't matter what type of retreat or event I'm doing. The number one thing I get positive feedback on is having some type of activity that helps people just be present and be centered. And so I like to start the day by just acknowledging, like, I know we're all coming in with different things. You may have a lot on your mind right now. And so I want to help you just be present here right now with us. And so sometimes it's just that invitation. I love to allow about a minute of just silence so people can just be. And that's not with any prayer prompt. That's not with any, just be for a minute. I usually will end that time with some type of prayer so people know, like, okay, no,
so it's not some new age yoga thing. Yes.
Yes. And then, I also think another great thing that can be added to that is doing some type of just breathing. So, not to be, new agey or whatever, but really, really simply, just reminding people to breathe in, breathe out, and to even help them to slow their breathing a little bit. There's one type of breathing exercise that's actually it's just a medically well-known breathing exercise that's called square breath. And it literally is just 4 counts in, pausing for 4 counts out, and then pausing for 4 counts. And there's something about that helps regulate our breathing, calm us down, but not in like a sleepy fall asleep, calm down, and just kind of tune in. I think a lot of us are very out of touch with our bodies and how we're feeling, and we come in the place just kind of a jumble of things. And so to allow ourselves to sit and just be and breathe for a minute or two sounds so simple and yet so extraordinary. Every time I do a retreat, that's the number one thing I get feedback on.
Oh, that's great. That makes sense to me because, we are kind of discombobulated, rushing to and fro, and just to kind of sit still. I mean, it's basically meditation or focusing on breathing because we live so much in our head sometimes to connect with our body. That's great. That's a good way to start it out, and then to end with prayer or psalm or something that kind of ties that in and invite God into the space. I love that.
Absolutely. Yeah. So just giving people permission to be human and acknowledge that there's other things happening, and then welcome them to be with you in that place. That's a huge thing.
So you said 3 things. So that was one.
The second thing that I love to suggest is something creative, and that's pretty vague. So let me give you an example of that. But I think one thing we really need to be mindful of is when we are very dependent on words in most of our stuff. And I obviously, my whole life as an editor, I mean, I love some words. So I'm down for words and
Well,
journaling.
pastoring is words. I mean, so much of it is words.
Yes. And for good reason. We have the
Right.
word, we're communicating,
Right.
this is so important. But just to be reminded that sometimes there is benefit to kind of getting out of that word space and allowing some creativity. So really, really easy way to incorporate creativity into your space is, let's say we do a reflection exercise, like just reflect on how your group is going this semester. Just, reflect on how God's meeting you or what's not working the way you thought or whatever. And then asking them out of that reflection to respond through creativity. So maybe that looks like drawing something. So just having colored pencils and markers. Maybe that's using Play-Doh to mold something. I know we're getting wild, right? Maybe that's just, using color, so just kind of providing some creative resources
that are nonverbal.
Nonverbal. And it's always fascinating to me. People will come up with stuff and you end up, there was one recently that we were reflecting on kind of how do you feel your leadership is right now? Like, how do you, like, what kind of state do you feel like you're in? And can you respond in some way just using colored pencils? And someone he ended up coloring his paper blue. Like it wasn't, he didn't do anything, crazy or masterful. But he was like, I didn't realize it, but I'm feeling blah right now. I'm feeling really blah.
Wow, that's kind of profound.
And didn't have the words necessarily for that. And so, as much as that sounds a little wild, because we're used to like journal your response,
right?
This can be really helpful for certain types of people, or even for those of us that like our words. And it can be really fun to debrief too, to be able to share with your table what you came up with or what came out of it. I would just warn you that if you're going to have them debrief, make sure you let them know ahead of time that
they need to share it.
Time sharing later. Yeah.
Right. That makes sense. It's interesting. So some creative component. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, it could be, we also can bring in creativity to like our team building exercises. Sometimes those are, building something together or putting something together. So there's lots of ways to bring in some creativity. But I like to share that kind of, coloring type of things because those are really easy no matter what you're doing.
True. You don't have to be an artist. Yes. I like that.
Yes. And then the third thing that I always like to encourage people to include is talking or inviting people into some type of spiritual practice that may be new to them or just different than what your ministry or church normally, leans on or goes to. So, now, if you have no idea where to start, there one great resource that I would suggest is Adele Calhoun has a book called Spiritual Disciplines Handbook, which is...
Yes, it's fabulous, yes.
Oh so many different spiritual practices that you can do on your own or in a group. And she just has a wonderful, very practical way of describing how to do each one. But one particular thing I think is really great and easy for any type of group to do is labyrinth prayer. And not a lot of people are overly familiar with it, but it is an ancient type of Christian prayer that actually originated in medieval Christianity. People were beginning to go on pilgrimages to the Holy Land or to different holy sites. And as you can imagine, at that time period, it was quite a journey.
Sure.
And so there was this whole metaphor that kind of came up out of this prayer of this journeying toward God, spending time with him, and then journeying back toward your normal life. And so that was not super feasible for everyone to go do those types of pilgrimages. Right. And so out of that came this labyrinth prayer, which you may have seen are kind of maze-like looking things. They're not mazes because you can't get lost. But you can see them paved in brick. A lot of places have them, especially like rehabilitation centers or monasteries will a lot of times have them. You can also just print them on paper and trace them with your finger. You can get
interesting
carved ones. And the whole idea, it's not fanciful or mystical. I mean, it's very simple. The idea is that as you travel toward the center, you're reflecting on your journey and where you are right now. And so as a retreat for your leaders, it could be about how are you feeling about your leadership right now? How are you feeling about your journey right now? How are you feeling about your personal relationship with Jesus right now as a leader? And it invites you to kind of let go of the things that are hindering you and to lay some things down. Right. And as you get to the center, then you get to spend time with Jesus and kind of reflect on what does he want me to take away? What does he want me to hear? Maybe there's a word, maybe there's just a conviction, like, yeah, I really have been carrying that, or I need to let go. And then as you journey back out, it's kind of preparing you to go back into that real life, that normal life,
Right.
and say, what do I need to continue in this journey? And so something about that journey language and actually doing something physical, because you can walk it, you can trace your finger, can be really helpful. I've also done this where you walk somewhere, a set place, stop there for a little bit, and then turn around. So you don't have to have special labyrinths to do this, but you can do the same theme. And so that kind of question or theme works really well for leadership retreats of all kinds.
That makes sense. It makes sense because it kind of is, you're blending different senses. So it's a little more holistic, right? And typically we're just kind of living out of one sense, whether it's our intellect or our creativity or our bodies. And so that was actually a question I had too. Like, if the goal is for people to walk away refreshed, and if like on your team, I have somebody who's super active and he would feel refreshed if we went and climbed a wall, versus somebody else who would never want to do anything all that physical, would feel refreshed if we just sat and painted pottery. I mean, there's different people. So how do you account for the different personalities and what they would, how they would respond to certain exercises? Do you give different options within? Like, I like the labyrinth one because you're right. I mean, somebody physically could go outside, or somebody could just sit still if that's more comfortable for them, and do it internally. So you just offer different mediums for the different personalities.
Yeah, I think that's one way to do it. I also love, one way that I end up doing it is usually providing, there's a time for that kind of reflection or time with God, and there might be 6 to 10 different types of things you could do. So labyrinth prayer might be one of them. Or
you give options. Oh, that's cool.
So there could be different options, and they just could be around the same theme or topic. So that's another great way to do it.
Right.
Or just honestly, I think we can let ourselves off the hook and know that we won't do all the things all the time.
Right.
And so if you can at least have some mixture, like you said, if you have labyrinth prayer that allows you to walk, and maybe something more quietly reflective, and maybe some group time so we can talk, if you have a couple of different things, that can help as well.
Yeah, that's a great idea. You just give people some options. They don't have to do the same thing, and you don't feel pressured. I remember being in a retreat where, and it was a staff thing where you had to go away and they'll come back 30 minutes with a word from God. And I was so stressed out. I'm an achiever, and so I was so stressed out by, what's the word, God? I need a word, because then you need to talk about it. And there was just all this pressure. I think I would have been better served if we said, God may speak to you in a word. He may speak to you not at all right now. He may just want you to rest in his presence. I mean, I think we need to say there's no specific outcome desired here, or to force or manipulate, but rather it's time for God to use however way he wishes, and to just leave it open like that, I think would have been much better, because that pressure is real.
Yes, it really
Especially
is.
Especially if you're with coworkers.
Oh my goodness.
And then everyone wants to come up with like the really profound thing that, that God has given them. And it's like, okay. And that is not refilling or refreshing. I think, what do you think about, these personality inventory, personality assessment tools? I know right now the Enneagram is having a huge moment. And I know you're pretty familiar with that. And that's an ancient practice that's now become really popular in the evangelical world. And it's basically a personality profile assessment thing. But there's Strength Finder. I mean, there's Myers-Briggs. There's so many things like that. What's your thoughts on how useful or not useful those kinds of tools are?
Yes. I love offering tools that help people discover a little bit more about themselves. And so I think that for a couple reasons, I think that we spend a lot of time thinking about God and our relationship with him, and very little time thinking about what's happening internally and how we're wired, and how that actually might be affecting our relationship with God, how we see God.
Yes.
I had a great conversation with a man recently who, if you are familiar with Enneagram, he's a 1 on the Enneagram.
Okay, so am I. So yes.
Nice.
He'd be my friend.
Yes. And he was talking about how he had kind of this epiphany moment where he, for forever, had thought that his self-criticism voices in his head were the voice of God, and didn't realize until somewhat recently, as he dug into this Enneagram stuff and realized, like, oh no, that's all me. That's actually not what God says about me. That's what I'm saying about me. And now I've actually, this has affected how I view God in our relationship, because I think I can never measure up to what he wants to do. And so I think there is something hugely valuable as we reflect and see our own selves in more and more honest ways. And there's lots of tools that can help do that. I think, I love them all, so I'm not even, I will say though, because the Enneagram is so popular, I do have one kind of caution, because I think the Enneagram is kind of, let me put it this way. The first time I ever took the Enneagram, I got the results and I threw them across the room and I screamed.
Did they not resonate with you, or were you just unhappy with it?
They resonated way too closely. They were all the things that I was trying to hide and didn't want anyone to see. Right. And it's a pretty vulnerable tool. And so, Myers-Briggs loves to talk about like the great strengths that you have, and StrengthsFinders literally is your top 5 strengths. Right. And Enneagram's like, here's your darkest fear. Yes.
Yes. It's definitely more vulnerable. And I think when you share it though, the funny thing is, when I have talked about the Enneagram, like, it's no surprise to anyone who knows me. Like, well, of course you're a 1. Of course, you're wanting to reform everyone and everything, including yourself. So it's like, oh, I thought this was just, how I was supposed to be. Like, I didn't know that how I was interacting with God and others was a reflection of that. But as vulnerable as it is, as with so many things, other people already know. So we may as well figure out what it is other people already know about us, and then figure out if we want to grow from that.
Wise words. Yes. I think, if you're going to use the Enneagram, allowing people the space to share and participate to their level of, ability or willingness. But also I think, like you said, it's a great tool to really reveal to you, like, oh, this is actually like, everyone else knows this about me. Right. I think it is by far, of any of the tools I've used in this kind of area, been the most helpful for me to actually see my blind spots and to see areas that God wants me to grow in. And so it is vulnerable. And it is also a great tool for spiritual growth.
Yeah,
so
I think the one thing I did like about it, because it's having a bit of a heyday on our staff, and was there's a section in one of the books where it talks about when you're healthy, you operate in this way. When you're not healthy, you operate in this way. And that's kind of what you're talking about, the dark side. So it's got the winsome side. If you are a 1, for example, like me, then you get stuff done, and people like that. And so there's things that are beneficial. And then on the dark side, when you're not, you get to be really judgmental and harsh, and people don't like that. And that comes out in teams. So when you're on a retreat with your team and you kind of go, hey, here's the ways that my strengths are helpful for our team, and here's when I'm not healthy and I'm feeling insecure, this is what it looks like. And then people can recognize it. And I think that's another kind of team building thing. So I'm actually a fan of just using any kind of tool that allows you to talk about yourself in a way to say yes, not so much to get labeled, or now a negative thing with the Enneagram is people are just labeling each other. So our small group did this with each other, and we're like, oh, you are a whatever, and the husbands all revolted. They're like, no, I am not that, don't you tell me. And we're just labeling our children, and it just became a very funny mess. But if you actually use it for the purpose it was designed, which is to kind of reveal more things about yourself, and like you said, the blind spots, and other personality tests will also do something very similar, and then talk about in the work context or on the team or when you're coaching leaders, like what comes out, and then kind of work that through. I think that becomes a really helpful piece of self-knowledge.
Absolutely. And I think, like you said, there are some really good benefits to any of these you're doing, Myers-Briggs or Enneagram, or there's things that come out that say that is something we need on our team, and we appreciate that about your personality. And so I think when we can call those things out and even attach them to like, yeah, like you always are the one that does, gets the thing done. We start it and then we get distracted, but you actually make sure that we follow through. That can be really, really helpful, and keep inviting people into leaning more into those parts of the healthy part of their personality rather than the dark side, like you said.
Well, and we talked earlier about the need to be fully present and to be undistracted. So I have to ask, okay, so do you take people's cell phones at the beginning of the retreat? Do you tell them don't bring your laptops? Like, do you not let them check at lunchtime? I think that's such a struggle because we're so attached to our devices. But do you recommend that you enforce a rule like that, or do you just let people do what they're comfortable with, or what do you do?
Great question. And I go back and forth on this. So my policy right now, as I'm leading retreats, is I invite people, if that's helpful to them, to turn off their phones kind of during that beginning centering time. Like that's a great time to say, hey, if it's helpful to you, go ahead and put your phone away and slide it away, put it on silent so it's not distracting. You can absolutely check it later, kind of let people know that that's an option. But at the same time, to let people know, like, if you need your phone, if you know you need to be on call for childcare purposes or whatever's going on, there's no guilt here. There's no shame here. Do what you need to do. Okay. That's kind of been my general policy. That said, I think there can be some real value, especially if your team. So for instance, if your staff team is going somewhere and, maybe one person has the phone and everyone has that number if they need, if there is an emergency or something like that, there's some real value to actually being forced a little bit to actually your devices.
I think so. I recently read an article that said, that did a study that, even if you turn off your phone or you have it on silent, but you have it on the desk next to you, even if it's face down, that your distractibility goes up a whole lot. And that was really surprising because I thought, well, we always take our phones into our meetings, but they're silent. And we don't look at them, but just having them at the table, sends the message that you're not fully present. And there's a piece of you kind of wondering about the thing. And so once apparently you check your phone, say for some quick thing, it takes like a really long time to get back re-engaging. So I've just been more cognizant of that and trying not to take it with me if I don't need it, because I think they're right. But I was so surprised by the findings. I'm like, oh, we're all being so virtuous. We all have our phones face down on silent, but no, that in itself is still distracting. So I think that discipline also kind of sends the message that this is kind of a sacred space. Obviously for emergencies, you need to have it handy, but, and I think that sets up an kind of an expectancy as well, and a desire to hear from God and have it be something different than our everyday. And maybe that's part of the win.
Yeah. I would be really just an encouragement. I was at I was leading a part of a staff retreat recently, and it was fascinating to me that during lunch, the head leader of that group, actually, she had been talking about, he had been talking about during the day, like, we really want to be present. We want to set down our phones, make sure everyone's phones are at the door, all these things. They actually had like a box by the door.
That's what we do with our middle school and high schoolers.
yes. And drop it at the door and all these things. And what was fascinating was as soon as lunch hit, he opened his laptop and started doing emails. Oh. And I was like,
so disruptive. Yeah.
Doing one thing and totally doing the opposite. And so I think even, the leaders were then kind of like, wait, should I be checking my
Yeah, because you follow the model. Yeah.
Yeah. So it just totally shifted the tone. And I thought he had done a really nice job of setting it up in the morning, and then it just totally shifted. So, so just be mindful as the leaders, as I know we're talking to the leaders here, of what you might be modeling unintentionally.
Right.
And to hold yourself to that same standard of what you're asking of your leaders.
Yeah, that's a good word. I also wanted to ask you before we close about small groups having retreats. And years ago, we were part of a small group, and that group was together about 8 or 9 years. And we did a couple of retreats, where we went away, and it helped that there's 2 of us on staff in that group. So we planned it. We did a marriage one and we did a family one. We planned it. And I loved doing communion together. But for the most part, we were really good friends, and this was our community. And so it wasn't really a hardship to hang out and do some of these things. But if you were going to give advice to small group point leaders about how to equip small group leaders to do a day retreat kind of thing, what would you adapt differently?
That's a great question. I love the idea of small groups getting away together. I've only actually done it a couple of times in a small group, and every time we've done it, it's been really lovely.
It's a scheduling is a challenge, yes.
It is. It totally is. But I, as a small group attendee, I love like the idea of getting away with my normal community rather than just kind of attending a random retreat.
Right.
Or a church-wide retreat or something. I think there's something kind of special about going with people that you know and love and have built your relationships with already. But to your question, I think number one, I think we have to, I mean, going back, this is so simple, but being mindful of the time because,
yes.
Again, I think the temptation is to way overplan, or to totally fill it with, things that feel especially spiritual. So what I mean by that is, filling it with a really in-depth Bible study and it's meant for 6 weeks, but we're going to do it all in our, 4 hours we have together or whatever.
Right.
And just I think to give people permission to say, spending just extended time sharing what's going on in your life and praying for one another can be a great part of your retreat, or spending time just taking a walk and, being with God and then coming back and debriefing that can be a very valuable experience, and to allow them to kind of the permission to kind of imagine what that could look like. It doesn't have to be a super structured Bible study or like a mega meeting. I think that's the other thought we want to
or like a deep confessional. Where you wash each other's feet, and it becomes like this whole, I always picture, high school retreats where you have all the tears and it's, I'll love you forever. And then it's the whole thing. Like, I think we tend to think it has to be this really big dramatic thing, but it could, gosh, in our hurried world, even just to have a little space like that. And some of the stuff that you mentioned earlier still apply. I think if you're a small group leader and you're thinking about doing this, to talk together about what you want to accomplish. Is it to have time away? Is it to bond it together? Is it to hear each other's stories? One of our retreats we did, we gave everybody about 20 minutes to share the highs and lows of their spiritual life. So not necessarily even just the conversion experience when they came to Christ, but what are those key points where you made a significant decision and you went a different way, or where something really hard happened? And so we actually learned, we had been together at that one retreat. We've been together already for about 5 years in a small group meeting regularly, but we learned things about each other that we did not know because we didn't have this kind of unstructured time or a format for it. Because normally you can't take that much time to share pretty stories. So I think it is doable. I've never really recommended it to our existing small groups, and I'm wondering why. Some of them naturally have done it, but they've done it more social activities like going camping together or doing that, which is so valuable too, because there's always the fun factor in it. But I think if you think about going away, say for a weekend with a small group, the number of hours that'll probably add up to the equivalent of a whole semester of meeting or more.
Absolutely. So the bonding that can happen, or like you said, just time to share the stories or what's really going on. Oh my goodness. Yeah.
So it'd be well worthwhile. So maybe the next time we should talk about how to run a small group. But I think maybe we start out with the point leaders, having a really effective, refreshing times with a staff and volunteers. And then you have to always, you have to model it first and go, and then we can then equip others to do the same. So thank you for doing that, even on our call.
Thank you. It's so fun. I love talking about this. I think it's just so important that we're thinking about holistically how we can be healthy, sustainable leaders. Sometimes it's so good to have the skills. We need the skills, and we get really focused on the skills of leading. But to get back to just being a healthy, sustainable leader.
Yes, I like that. Sustainable is a really important one, because it's a marathon, not not a sprint. And we both know a lot of people who are no longer in ministry because it is hard. And if you don't take care of these things, of your soul and the souls of those around you and do that intentionally, then you aren't going to be effective for long. So the work you're doing at the Perch and just in this program, hopefully will encourage many others to take a day or even half a day and to pay attention to what God's doing in their souls and for their teams as well. So Amy, thank you so much for being on the program.
Thank you for having me. Always a joy to talk to you, Carolyn.
Oh, so fun. Well, you can contact Amy and read more about her soul care and retreat ministry on her website. It's www.theperchplace.com, or you can connect with her on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter at The Perch Place. And you can she's got blog articles and just a number of other resources there that will help you plan a retreat. So hopefully you'll check her out. And she's also still on our Small Group Network Facebook page. We're never going to let you go. So you're going to stay there.
Yay,
She'll pop up there every so often because there's so many years of small groups ministry under her belt. So you can interact with her there as well. So thank you all for listening to Group Talk. We will see you next time.
Thank you so much to Carolyn Taketa and Amy Jackson for that great 2-part interview. June certainly was a treat. Now, before we go, let's talk about Accelerate. Rich Dugan, small groups pastor at Zarephath Christian Church in New Jersey, doubled his small groups in just a few months after attending an Accelerate small group workshop. These workshops can be found all over the country and are designed to help you and your leadership team build a 12 to 18-month strategic plan by going through the 20 questions every small group point person needs to know. You will finish the workshop with a strategic plan in your hand and implement immediately. Here are a few highlights. Accelerate Ohio is coming September 16th through the 18th. Limited spots remain. Lock in your spot today. Accelerate Atlanta is coming up October 21st and 22nd, and make sure you get your early bird price today. And finally, Accelerate Tulsa is coming up March 9th and 10th, 2020, so lock in that super early bird price by August 14th. Accelerate the health and growth of your small group ministry by attending one of these Accelerate workshops. Visit smallgroupnetwork.com/events to register today. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll catch you next month.
Thank you for listening to Group Talk. We invite you to subscribe to the podcast through iTunes and get new episodes downloaded automatically. Also, if you enjoy this program, please take a few minutes to give us a positive rating on iTunes so that other small group point people can find us more easily. We encourage you to visit our website at smallgroupnetwork.com to access our library of free resources, connect to a huddle with other small group ministry leaders in your area, read our blog articles, or join us on our Facebook group. Don't forget to use the hashtag SGNet when engaging with your social media channels. Thank you for your support.